I am notified that it is time for us to begin. We shall begin the begin.
Please.
She's telling me to shut up.
Well, the reading from Emmett Fox is entitled No Vengeance. Hatred ceases not with hatred, said the light of Asia, enunciating this great cosmic truth many centuries earlier. And the light of the world put it in the forefront of his teaching because it is the cornerstone of man and woman's salvation. Hatred ceases not with hatred. This doctrine of resist not evil is the great metaphysical secret. To the world, it sounds like moral suicide, the feeblest surrender to aggression. But in the light of the Jesus Christ revelation, it is seen to be superb spiritual strategy. Antagonize any situation and you give it power against yourself. Offer mental non-resistance and it crumbles away in front of you. Jesus gives no instructions for details of external conduct, and so the references here to suing at law, to coat and cloak, to lending and borrowing, to turning the other cheek, are illustrative and symbolical of mental states and are not to be taken in the narrow literal sense. We cannot too often remind ourselves that if the thought is right, the deed cannot be wrong. No teacher could ever say that a given act must necessarily be right at any time, because the play of circumstances in human life is too hopelessly complicated for any such prediction. If, when someone is behaving badly, you will immediately switch your attention from the human to the divine and concentrate upon God or upon the real spiritual self of the person in question, you will find that his conduct will immediately change. And this is the true revenge. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, for it is written, vengeance is mine, and I will repay, says the Lord. And that scripture is from Romans chapter 12, verse 19.
Thank you. Okay, the title of the talk today is Reaffirming Our Godstuff. And for anyone who's joining us for the first time, one of our mantras is, we're all God stuff. We're all star stuff. We're all stardust. And this talk started with an article I came across. I believe it was in New Atlas. The title is, We Now Have Evidence of How Old Trees Share Critical Information with Forest Youth. And it's about a scientific paper where they were able to track minute electrical signals from older trees to younger ones in a forest, specifically in this case, birch trees in the Costa Boca forest in the Dolomites. And what they noticed was when there was an event such as an eclipse coming, the signals from the old trees to the new ones changed about a few hours ahead of time. And then the young trees caught on and started sending the same signals. And the researchers ultimately concluded that what was happening was the older trees knew an eclipse was coming and that would screw up the day in terms of their normal, the normal schedule of what trees do. And they were warning the young trees so that they could be prepared for it as well. Because with a disruption comes the risk of increased vulnerability to parasites, to insects, to infections. And for them, of course, the whole idea of trees knowing in advance of a cosmic event was something in itself, much less that one tree remembers it and knows it's coming and warns the younger ones so that they can be prepared. And my thought was, what a wonderful example of the concept that we're all God stuff. That here's something completely outside of the understanding or even the expectations of human beings, where part of nature is taking care of its own. And then I sort of was expanding, thinking about that, and the fact that with all of us being God stuff, there's a breadth of possibilities of power that we as humans in the flesh don't normally think of, have trouble conceiving. Interestingly, one of the researchers talking about how the trees were spreading information called it the wood wide web. So as I was thinking about this, I was talking with a colleague of mine who told me that a few days earlier, she had been undergoing what you call it when you'd use the little pins? I'm just blanking on it.
Oh, well.
Acupuncture, an acupuncture session, and I'll call it, removed shutters from or activated her memory of the pain of when her family abandoned her. And as she told me, she was feeling the pain, feeling the grief, and then realized she didn't have to, that she no longer needed to be in pain. And she remembered that, I think it's Louise Hay says, back pain has to do with abandonment. She has scoliosis. For years, it's been too painful to walk even 3 or 4 blocks. So she gave up the pain. She gave up the grief. I don't need to feel abandoned anymore. I don't need to be harboring the feelings around that. A day later, she found her back pain was gone, and she's now walking the trails. Again, medically, an impossibility. She has scoliosis. That's all there is to it. Can't be treated. But we're made of God stuff. And that, if we allow it, changes the equation. So thinking about that, knowing that was what I was going to talk about, the whole idea of our acknowledging that we are not separate existences, but even the very chair we're sitting on is part of God stuff. I came across an article and I was thinking about, okay, if we're all about God stuff, that means there's so many waves of possibility, so many influences that can guide us, that if we are willing to allow that we are part of this amorphous great mass, then the possibilities are endless if we allow ourselves to understand that. At which point I came across an article. It was a fellow who, well, his second grade kid came home sort of upset. He said that there's some of the kids at lunchtime who they won't give the hot lunches to. And this upset the father. He thought maybe something evil or something wrong was going on. So he called the principal and asked about that. My son says that there's some kids who only get a cold sandwich and not the warm lunch that everyone else gets. And the principal explained that these were children whose parents hadn't paid the lunch bill, couldn't give the kid money for lunch. Well, they had to feed him, but all they were going to do is give him a cold sandwich. And the father explained this to the second grader, and the second grader said, couldn't they just let them eat? And the more the father thought about it, the more he realized how utterly shaming and embarrassing it must be to a child when the cafeteria person takes away the warm lunch he's just been given and hands him a cold sandwich. He called up the principal and said, how much do the kids owe? $835 for the whole school. And he thought to himself, I can do without some Starbucks. He wrote out a check for $835. So all the children at school could have a warm lunch. And then he started talking about it with others. And after a while, other people were donating money so he could pay off other schools. He's paid off the lunch bills for, I think he said 50 schools so far. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is because he didn't start out doing it, but he's made it out of God stuff, and he responded to something that brought pain to others. We don't know how we're going to be led or what we're willing to accept. But the less we put strictures on our experience and our thoughts, the easier it is to flow with this universe of God stuff. In fact, what I do is I gather information that sort of comes my way and it sort of fits together like a jigsaw puzzle. And I came across someone who wrote, synchronicity is the universe saying yes. Now think for a minute in your own life, the number of times something utterly unexpected falls together. And out of curiosity, I looked up on the web to see, what do people say about synchronicity? And there are stories of people who tell, really, shall we say, odd synchronicities. But I think it's worth paying attention to because it shows how extensively our interconnection with all of God's stuff works. A fellow, no name associated with it, wrote, I had just finished Jung's book on synchronicity, so I thought I would see if one could just so happen to occur for me without me trying or looking too hard. Later on, he writes, my roommate and I felt like going out to eat, so we went to our favorite place. We were talking to the bartender during our meal, and he told us he's from Kansas City, Missouri. Him and I were talking about how much we love that city, but my roommate had never been. So I told her we should go the next day for a little vacation, as I have a friend that I grew up with that lives there, and we could probably stay at his place. Now, I hadn't spoken to or seen this friend for years. So I reached out, and he was indeed excited with the idea of catching up and would see us tomorrow. Now, we grew up in a town of 2,000, about 5 hours away from where I live now. His name was Spray, and he always went by his last name, Spray. So then, where they were eating, a band started playing, bluegrass band, and they were doing a free bluegrass session. So she and her roommate decided to stay for it. And while they were playing, she was texting her buddy Spray, making all the arrangements. And one of the musicians says to the mic that he's not going to play a banjo riff that he learned 40 years ago in a little town called Cahokia, which just so happens to be my hometown and birthplace, and that nobody's ever heard of. He then goes on to say that the man who taught him this tune went by the name of Spray. Gilbert Spray was his name, but he just went by Spray. Never met a Spray I didn't like, said the musician. And then he played the tune for us. And I thought, what are the actual odds? This is while I'm texting Spray from Cahokia, the Spray from Cahokia that he knew. So I asked him if he ever knew a Gilbert Spray, and he replies that Gilbert was his grandpa and was actually a somewhat famous bluegrass musician. Synchronicity. So that's a wonderful story of, shall we say, a truly outlandish set of connections happening all at once. And on the web, there's loads of stories like that. But let's be also real about this. I don't expect that I'm ever going to have a synchronicity like that. I could be wrong. But you don't have to, in being involved and acknowledging your part in the God stuff, the experiences you have needn't be head turning. They don't need to be gobsmackingly obvious. Just a few that I've heard over the years that meant something to the person, but aren't wham. I've mentioned before Father Chuck, who left the Roman Catholic Church when he discovered what other priests were doing, and is part of the Ohio Orthodox Catholic Church. And he tells the story of one day in that church, you have to have a job to support yourself. The church does not supply money for that. And he'd had a rough day at work. It had been a rough week. Everything was going wrong, and he had just had it. He was tired of being a priest. And when he got home from work, as he tells it, he marched down to the altar, because he lived in the basement below the church, and told God he's sick of all this. He was done with it. He was quitting the priesthood. He's Franciscan, so he wears the robe. He took off his rope. He took off the robe, threw it on the altar, and went downstairs to cook some dinner and figure out what he was going to do next. Within 10 minutes and for the next 3 hours, he got phone call after phone call after phone call after phone call from people he hadn't talked with in years, all calling him to say thank you for what he had helped them become. Synchronicity. Meaningful for him. Gobsmacking? No. Or Sister Pepper, the founder of our home church. One day, she recounted the story. She was having a nice bubble bath. And as she was sitting there, she found herself thinking how easy it would be to get a kitchen knife and slit her wrists and just bleed out and die. And she shook herself as she tells the story, said, that's not me. Okay, who am I picking up? Who in my congregation is thinking of killing themselves? And she got out, dried herself, thought and prayed hard, figured out who it was, did an intervention. We're all connected to God stuff. We don't know how it's all going to happen. But if we allow it and allow ourselves to meld, it's there's the Star Trek series with Jean-Luc Picard, or is it the other one? At any rate, there's a fellow named Odo who's part of an existence, a set of beings who are fluid, and they can take any shape they want. Well, and the rest of the time they look just like an ocean. Well, in a sense, that's sort of where we are. We can define ourselves in limited ways and miss being part of the whole ocean, or we can be open. Another coincidence, another colleague of mine who is warm and gentle and caring works in a hospital. And she's noticed that often she gets assigned to a shift where she's with someone she normally doesn't work with who's having a crisis. And she's able to provide the caring, the ear, or whatever's necessary to help that person get past the crisis. She doesn't find that's what she's doing, but she's there, and when there's a need, she responds. Or me, if I'm driving someplace for a wedding and I know the parking is going to be really hard and I drive a big van, I've learned I ought to ask all my entities and spirits and ancestors to help me find a parking place. And it's not all that unusual that as I pull into the area, I find somebody in a big van pulling out of a spot that fits me so I can fit right in. I would suspect if you do the same when you're going someplace where you know parking is difficult, you might get similar results. But in general, as you're part of this spiritual congregation, I suspect that you, more than many people, experience more synchronicities, more movement within the stardust, within the God existence in your life. And don't be afraid of it. Expect good. Be open to leadings, because you don't know where the God stuff you're going to be called to be part of it. This is something, if you think about all the different Emmett Fox readings that you hear week after week, he calls on us to expect good, to expect God to work things out, to expect ourselves to be a part of this divine God stuff. And as I was writing this, I thought of Brother Mandus. My mother was, how do I put it, a follower of Brother Mandus in the World Healing Crusade. And if you're not familiar with that organization, it comes out of Blackpool, England, take some time to Google it. It's a wonderful non-denominational organization that preaches God's love and healing. They're a healing crusade. And so I looked him up to see what he had to say about all this. And here's a section from something he wrote. He wrote, "No matter how much we talk about God, we are always involved in opinion about that which can never be defined. No matter how much we may talk about him, in the end, we are always brought back to one basic need: to experience the presence of God as an active principle of life itself. In the end, there can be no other way than making ourselves available to him in realization that there is only God in the entire universe." So in our terminology, in the realization there is only God stuff in the entire universe, or the other way around, the universe is all God stuff, and we are part of that universe. Only when we know this realistically, he says, as a fundamental in life, can we really begin that wonderful spiritual journey in which the love of God becomes revealed in thought, word, and action. What we're all really seeking to know is that we can never be separated from the Spirit of God. Or again, translated, we can never be separated from God's stuff because we are God's stuff. He goes on, I'm sure that is what Jesus meant when he said, "If you have looked upon me, you have seen the Father." Because if I look upon you, he says, I see the Father. If God is at all points, at all times, everything exists in and through and by his Spirit. He pervades and directs the orbits of the universes 1,000,000 light years away, upholds the atomic structure of every grain of sand. He is equally in a drop of water, in a far ocean, and in the air we take into our lungs. He is the life and plan in everything created in every spiritual or material realm. And that's where we are now, have been, always will be. And it's our choice how open, how comfortable we are to be a part of this amorphous everything with no rules except love, with all power, but loving power. And that led me to a simple double statement as a reminder to me, and I'll share it with you. Life's magic is within me. God's magic is within me. That's who we are. And that's where we are. That's all I got to say today, folks. Anything you want to add to it? Leah, and then Ellie.
Excuse me, Cheryl Ann had put her hand up,
Oh,
so I
okay, we'll
think
get to
she was
Cheryl Ann
before
too then.
me.
Thank you. Go ahead and
Okay.
you go first, then we'll do Ellie, and then we'll go to Cheryl Ann.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, good to see you, Cheryl. And I want to say I really liked what you talked about tonight because talk about I can't pronounce that word.
Synchronicity.
Yeah, um, I've noticed, and I never know what word I cannot pronounce anymore. But anyway, I like what you had to say. And this is a little from Bruno Groening. I had read this to our circle of friends thing we had at 2 this afternoon. And it's real short, but to me, I love it. Love life. God. God is everywhere. And so here too, there is proof that God really and truly is everywhere. But God wants to dwell in every heart, in the heart of every single human being. And so I had said that to the community hour I was in, and you talked about God, how we're all part of that. That to me, it's that S word and everything. And so that's why I felt I needed to share it again with you and everybody here, because yeah, it is. It's just thinking about it. I'm getting a high. What can I say? I love it so much because that's what he does for me. He gets me high and everything's perfect. So thank you.
Thank you. Synchronicity, folks. Okay, Ellie, and then Cheryl Ann. Okay, you're good.
Really enjoyed your talk, Brian. Especially your last part where you said life's magic is within me, and God or the divine is within me. I was in one of my witchy groups this week, and someone had posed a question, about how hard is doing a spell. And of course, me not thinking, I sometimes I don't think when I talk, that foot, I call it, foot to mouth disease. Don't think before I say things sometimes. I think Peter had that too, one of Messiah's disciples, because he was always in trouble. But anyway, another story. And I said, well, do you know how to cook? Do you know how to make a cup of tea? Do you know how to clean your house? And, she responded and she goes, well, of course I do. Don't be stupid. And then she recanted and said, oh, I'm sorry. And I said, well, this is what spell work, prayer work, affirmation work is. You do it without thinking. You put a tea bag in your water or your milk to make your tea. You put your ingredients in whatever you're going to make your pot of food. You put together, your spray bottle of oils and whatnot to clean with. And I go, people make this more difficult than what it is. And of course, she was referring to the the witchcraft things. But in general, people make this, what you were saying, life's magic is within me. The divine is within me. People make that more complicated than what it is. It is simply that. They're the same, the life force. Today, if, depending on who knows it or not, is May 4th. It's also Star Wars Day. May the force be with you. And so whether you want to call it the divine, the force, whatever you want to call it, it's there. So I'm reading a book, which, surprise, surprise. But it's called, and, it's talking about, healing. And you had said, allow yourself to meld, to be, what was it? If we allow ourselves to meld, with things, the synchronicity of things. And one of the things that brought back one of the things in the book, as you read, allow yourself, there's that phrase, the space and time to process your emotions as they arise. When you come across a statement or story that awakens something within you, pause, sit with the feeling, breathe into it, expand it, study it. Which to me kind of is the same as synchronicity. It's going to happen whether you look for it or not. Several years ago, I was at one of his brother's house, the one that he lost a couple of years ago. And, I was doing some house cleaning for him, and they were, I didn't know how bad they needed food. And I had just gone shopping. One of the stores I shopped at was just down the road from their house. And when I was at the store, I was led, nudged, told, whatever word you want to put there, to get a few extra items. Okay, whatever, and okay, what extra items? And I was presented a list, and I'm like, well, okay. So I get back, to my friend's house, and I said, hey, by the way, I picked up some groceries. Can I just go ahead and, leave them in the car or bring the refrigerated stuff in? And he's like, yeah, sure, no problem. So before I left, I brought, the things in and, making sure everything was done, there wasn't anything in the machine, making sure the fur baby was okay. And he reminded me of the things that were in the house that I brought in. And he goes, oh, don't forget your food. And I looked at him and I go, that's yours. And he started crying. He goes, I know you guys don't have much either, but you never know how much this will mean to us. Okay. And I said, I was just sharing. And he goes, but that's it. You heard. And it was, one of those things that, he knew what we had and didn't have. He had known Donovan for 20 plus years. So him, Chris, and Donovan, they were all three like the Three Musketeers. And so when he said, I know, and yet, he was like, I was just, and he looked at me, he goes, doesn't matter, you already know. Synchronicity, this past week, another, thing happened. I had just made bread and, 3 loaves. I usually make 2, I made 3, I didn't know why. I saw someone in town, see her at the food bank occasionally. And, I saw her walk, out and about. I was walking home from the store. I had bought a couple things we needed. And she goes, I need bread, but they don't sell it here. And I go, well, what kind? And, maybe when I'm in town in Lewiston, I can pick you up some. She goes, no, my husband needs a very specific kind of bread. He has health needs. I go, well, what kind of bread does he eat? Maybe I can pick him up. No, he needs specific bread. And I looked at her, I go, it doesn't happen to be like a sprouted flour bread, does it? She looked at me and started crying. She goes, how did you know? I go, give me a minute. You can either follow me home or I can bring it out to you. I brought her out the 2 loaves and she was still crying. She goes, but how did you know? And she goes, where did you find it? I go, I make it. She goes, do you want money for it? No. But when you're connected, as you were saying, you hear things, you feel things. And to me, it's amazing. It's one of those gratitude things that you pray on every week. Thank you that you use us for those miracles. I just, I'm grateful that the divine uses us, that he thinks, that he thinks we're worthy enough to be used because of all that garbage that we're brought up in. And sometimes it makes us feel that, we're not worthy or we don't amount to much or any of those lies. But then something happens that the divine shows us, hey, I chose you for this task. Anyway, I can go on and on about stuff like that because the divine is just amazes me when things like that happen. And then I can see the divine in those situations. That synchronicity, that S word, as Leah says. So thank you for your talk. They're always timely. How do you do that?
Synchronicity.
Synchronicity. I wait for the divine to show me what to say. I remember a story, back when Sister Pepper, we'd be singing some hymns and singing more hymns and singing more hymns. And she says, God hasn't told me what to talk about yet, so we're going to sing another hymn. And there are times when it seems to get awful close to Sunday night, and I still don't know. And then the information of go this way comes up. So the same thing, we're all part of God's stuff. Cheryl Ann, you're next.
Yeah, so I appreciate the synchronicities too. Today at my home church, if you will call it that, Progressive Spiritualist Church in Indy, the minister was saying, each day, each night, I pray, feed the hungry, feed the hungry. She goes, and then I realized, she goes, I have to take food to the food pantry. She's like, you can't just pray. You also have to back it up with action. And something early in your sermon brought that to my mind. There were several different things that you said that brought different things, triggered different things within me. Another was the book, The Hidden Life of Trees. I had read that book back when I wanted to study forest bathing. And so it talks about that network, how the trees will feed each other and communicate with each other. Now, according to that book, it only happened in old growth forests. But I did share in the chat a gift link that's good for about 48 hours, where it's a film on awareness and consciousness. And of course, they talk about human awareness, but they also talk about consciousness in trees and other things. So I think folks might find that very interesting. And then you were talking about, and we often talk about this, there's only God here, or God being I'll use my words, the source of all that is, God in everything, the divine presence in everything. And I went to a retreat yesterday with the friends, the Quakers, about medieval female mystics and the message that they have for us today. And the mystic I got was Saint Hildegard, and I knew that I would. She's my favorite, and she was a prolific writer and composer. And one of the things that she stated was that, okay, so to put this in context, this was 1,000 years ago that she lived. And she talked about God being, the only thing that is here. And I'm just paraphrasing what she said. I don't have the exact quote in front of me because it's with my things up in my library. But I tend to think of, 1,000 years ago, people were so clueless, but actually in that medieval period, there was a really good connection with the earth and the cosmos and the divine presence being in everything. People were actually more connected with it. It wasn't until later that they started getting kind of removed from that connection that Ellie also talked about. And then one last thing, I want to touch on the movie, the Two Popes. One pope being, of course, Pope Francis, and the other being his predecessor. I believe it was Pope Benedict, but don't hold my feet to the fire on that one. So, Pope Francis is remembered as, just a really fabulous spiritual leader. And unlike, most of the other popes that we've experienced in our lifetime. But what was interesting in the film, and the film's quite dry. I will give you that fair warning. But I wanted to watch it because I wanted to know more about him. So a couple of years ago, well, it was probably 10 years ago now, when I visited Argentina, which is where he's from, in the I'll call it the town square. There were mothers there still protesting for what they call the disappeared in our language, and obviously in Spanish it's something else. But there were like those chalk outlines of bodies on the ground, and there are actually museums that tell the story of the disappeared. Well, real quick, it was people who spoke out against the current government, and it was a dictatorship. And in one fell swoop, basically all of these people disappeared. And Pope Francis, he didn't go by that name at that time, but he was a young priest at the time, and he made a bad decision. He made a bad decision that affected all the Jesuit priests that he was in charge of. And he paid dearly for that bad decision. But he also, in time, learned from it. And it helped shape him to that great spiritual leader that he then became, later on in life. And with that, I would just encourage everyone to watch it. I myself, look at somebody like Pope Francis, and I'm like, oh, he had it easy. He was always, on the right path, and it's not true. You don't know, to Brian's point, what path somebody's walking and what is affecting their life. And that was something that he really never forgave himself for. As a matter of fact, Pope Benedict absolved him of that. Whether Francis, embraced that forgiveness or not for himself, I don't know. But he certainly was moved by the fact that that the prior pope had forgiven him, absolved him of that sin. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Anybody else with something? Yes, Karen A.
Yeah, I
It's-
always, since I
I'm
was
sorry,
5,
just real quick. I'm sorry, Karen, just real quick. You could talk, but for a second. Okay, Susie has her hand up also, Brian.
Okay, thank
So-
you. Thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead, Karen A, then we'll come to you,
Okay.
Susie.
well, since I was a kid, maybe around 5, I've had dreams of things that would happen either right away, like within that day, or within a month or so. And synchronicity seems to be helping me now on this, because I saw on TV something about Highway 20. It's the longest, what's the word, contiguous highway that goes from the East Coast all the way to the coast of Oregon. And I thought, wow, that's cool. I didn't know that. And because I've been through that, which is through Yellowstone and so on vacation. And the next day, I hear that there was a horrible accident at the entryway to Yellowstone on Highway 20 the next day. So it's not unusual for me to see that kind of thing. And now that I'm paying particular attention to that, it kind of is a new tool.
So thank you for sharing. Okay, Susie? You get it. Let's see if we can unmute you.
Okay,
There
there
you
we
go.
are.
There you go. Okay.
So, sorry about that. Yesterday was Friday. Friday was the day of that word that I can't get out either. I finally got just, you know what, made the dang decision. The dog food has got to be delivered to the lady I got my dog from. It's a unopened bag of dog food. I can't use it. My dog can't eat it. Let me donate it. And so I got over there and I'm coming back. I've run a couple of errands on the way and I'm just like, I really want to go home and go to bed and take a nap. And then I got into Brighton and I thought, well, I ought to try and wash the truck. That would be a really good idea. And the long line is so dang long. Then okay, we're not going to do that. And I pull back out on the main road and I go, oh crap. Well, now we're in this big, huge, long traffic jam. So there's another way to go home that's a little longer. And I really don't, we're just going to go that way. And the next thing I know, I'm in the Lowe's parking lot on the other end of town. Now Lowe's carries light bulbs, the yellow light bulbs. And I need those because it's coming up on Miller moth time. And I'm trying to see if I can use bug lights to keep the dang things out of the house. And all right, I'll go in and look. I did get the light bulbs, but what I did do was I'm wearing my purple hat, and the lady at the checkout looked at me and said, oh, and she looked so sad. And I said, are you okay? She said, purple was her daughter's favorite color, and her daughter's birthday was just a few days ago, and her daughter had left us a few years ago, and she was really in grief, and she's having a real bad time of it. Well, I have a little story I can tell her that maybe that will help her to be able to deal with some of this grief. It's about how to bring your lost loved one into the present and recognize how safe they are here. So nothing can hurt them now. And well, she almost cried, but she really appreciated that. And then we got in a little bit more talking, and she made another comment that I said, you're looking for answers for something, and I think I have resources for you. And while we're doing all this, she has to go help other people because, that's part of her job, right? So she's doing that. And I took out a piece of paper and I wrote down a couple of places that she could go to get resources to help her, hopefully help her with what she was dealing with. And she was so grateful. I got the most wonderful hug from her and was able to give her a most wonderful hug back. And I walked back out to the vehicle a little bit later and I thought, oh, I guess this is why I needed to come here. And how did I get to this parking lot to begin with? Because I don't remember coming across that road from the traffic jam across. But there I was, and I was put there for a reason. She needed whatever it was that I had to give her. And I really am just grateful that I could do that. And I really hope that it will help her. That's my story.
Yay. So here we are sharing what the divine has called us for. And isn't that cool? And isn't it wonderful that we have a community where it isn't a miracle when a miracle occurs? It's expected. Yay. So let's now move to our silence to see what the great divine might have to communicate to us in the next 5 or 6 minutes. Dear God, thank you for having brought us together, for enabling us to grow and share from each other's experiences and wisdom. Thank you for giving me the opportunity here to share with one another of our lives and to
Thank-
joy one another for their lives as we all move forward. We thank you for guiding us, for healing us, for teaching us, for bringing good sometimes when we don't see it or don't see how. Thank you for putting us in places where we can bring good and represent your love to those who need. We give you full gratitude for all the good in our lives, all the love in our lives, all the learning we continue to receive. We say thank you, thank you, thank you. And we all say, amen.
Amen.
We'll see you next week. And I believe Lori's going to be talking next week. I don't know the topic yet, but you'll find out.
I think it's Mother's Day next week.
Oh,
Is that
okay.
right?
That too.
That too.
Yeah.
Okay. There ought to be a good joke about that, but I can't think of it. So take care all. Be blessed.
And have a good week.
Yes.